The Intergalactic Culinary Institute rose like a crystal spire above the methane clouds of Sector 7, where the galaxy's elite chefs served dishes worth more than planets. In its gleaming kitchens, a human single father worked the prep station, invisible among aliens who measured worth in Michelin stars and molecular gastronomy. But when the daughter of the Kryn Empire's food critic arrived for her first meal, turning her nose at every truffle-soaked masterpiece, she did something that would change everything. She asked the prep cook if he knew what a Pop-Tart was. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The kitchen of the Intergalactic Culinary Institute stretched like a cathedral of steel and light, its ceilings vaulted high enough to swallow the prayers of lesser cooks. Holographic flames danced beneath levitating pans. The air shimmered with heat and the sharp bite of exotic spices harvested from worlds Thomas Reed would never visit. He stood at the prep station in the corner, his human hands moving with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned long ago that precision mattered more than speed. Around him, the alien chefs moved like gods. Chef Zolthar, a Velkarian with skin like polished obsidian and 6 arms that could julienne a meteorite, barked orders in 3 languages simultaneously. His sous chefs scurried, their scales and feathers catching the light as they plated dishes that cost more than Thomas earned in a year. They did not look at Thomas. To them, he was the shadow that diced onions and peeled vegetables, the necessary ghost who prepared ingredients for their masterpieces. Thomas's knife moved through a pile of Andromedan strawberries, each one worth a month's rent. The blade was old, brought from Earth, its handle worn smooth by a decade of use. He cut each berry with the same care he used when making breakfast for Emma, his daughter, half a galaxy away on a planet that seemed smaller every day he spent among the stars. Chef Raxus, a threnoid with too many teeth and not enough kindness, passed behind Thomas and knocked his cutting board askew. Strawberries tumbled across the counter. Laughter rippled through the kitchen, sharp as broken glass. Thomas said nothing. He gathered the berries, rinsed them, began again. His face remained calm as morning water, though his jaw tightened just enough to ache. The kitchen doors burst open with a sound like thunder swallowed by silk. The room fell silent. Even Zolthar's 6 arms stilled mid-gesture. Ambassador Thys entered first, her crystalline body refracting light into 1,000 dancing colors. Behind her came the delegation everyone had whispered about for weeks. The Kryn, food critics whose reviews could collapse economies, whose approval was worth more than entire star systems. And at the center, draped in robes that seemed woven from twilight itself, walked Critic Supreme Valora. Her eyes, vast and dark as event horizons, swept across the kitchen. Beside her, small and silent, walked her daughter Lyra. The child's skin held the faint luminescence of deep-sea creatures, her hair a cascade of silver that moved as if underwater. She looked no older than Emma, though Thomas knew age meant different things to different species. Zolthar bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. His voice, usually commanding, turned honeyed and soft. The other chefs arranged themselves like jewels on display, preening and gleaming. Thomas kept cutting strawberries. No one noticed. No one ever did. But Lyra's eyes found him anyway, curious and somehow sad, as if recognizing something familiar in his invisible hands. The tasting table gleamed like an altar built for worship of the impossible. It stretched 20 feet across the Institute's grand hall, carved from a single piece of Celestian marble that held starlight in its veins. The galaxy's most celebrated chefs had spent 3 days preparing for this moment. Each dish represented the pinnacle of their art, techniques refined across centuries, ingredients that existed nowhere else in the known universe. Lyra sat at the table's center, small and still as a stone dropped in deep water. Her mother, Valora, stood behind her with the patience of someone who had watched civilizations rise and fall. Around them, the Institute's faculty gathered in nervous constellation, their breathing synchronized with anticipation. Thomas remained at his prep station, washing cutting boards because someone had to, and no one else would. Chef Zolthar presented the first dish himself. His 6 arms moved in practiced choreography as he lifted the cloche with theatrical precision. Beneath it, a single sphere of crystallized time floated above a bed of nebula foam, the whole thing glowing with bioluminescent precision. He described it in reverential tones, each word and chosen to evoke wonder and submission. The dish had taken 47 hours to prepare. 3 apprentices had fainted from the concentration required. Lyra stared at it, her nose wrinkled. She did not reach for the silver utensil Zolthar had positioned at the exact angle recommended by the Galactic Culinary Commission. She simply looked away, her gaze drifting across the hall as if searching for something that was not there. Zolthar's confidence flickered like a candle in wind. He gestured to Chef Raxus, who brought forward the second course. Essence of volcanic spring, compressed into edible crystals, served on a bed of quantum herbs that existed in 2 states simultaneously. Lyra did not even look at it. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, confusion spreading like ink in water. Dish after dish appeared. Truffle foam infused with the dreams of sleeping moons. Protein strands woven into impossible geometries. A dessert that sang in frequencies only Kryn ears could hear. Each one was rejected without ceremony, without explanation. Lyra's expression never changed from that distant, searching sadness. Velora said nothing. Her silence pressed against the room like atmospheric pressure. The chefs began to sweat despite the climate-controlled air. Zolthar's obsidian skin lost its luster. This was catastrophe. This was career-ending. One did not fail the critic supreme and continued teaching. Lyra stood suddenly, her chair scraping against marble with a sound that made everyone flinch. She walked away from the table, her small feet making no sound as she crossed the hall. The adults watched, paralyzed by protocol and fear. Where could she possibly be going? What could she want that they had not already offered? She walked toward the prep station, toward Thomas. He was wiping down his counter, the motion automatic as breathing. He had not watched the tasting. He had work to finish before his shift ended, and Emma would be waking soon on Earth. He wanted to call in her before school, to hear her voice even if the lag made conversation feel like throwing words into an empty well. Lyra stopped at the edge of his station. Her eyes, large and luminous, watched his hands as he worked. She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that felt ancient despite her youth. Thomas noticed her and froze, uncertain. Children made him think of Emma. They always did. The entire hall held its breath. Velora's eyes narrowed, not with anger but with something sharper. Interest. Recognition. As if she had been waiting for this exact moment, testing everyone until she found the one person who would not perform. Lyra's voice was soft as moth wings against glass. She spoke in standard galactic, but her accent carried the musical lilt of her home world, each word rising and falling like a question, even when it was not. "Do you know what a Pop-Tart is?" she asked. The hall erupted, not with sound, but with a silence so complete it felt like the air had been sucked into space. Every chef, every apprentice, every dignitary turned to stare. Thomas blinked, his cloth still in hand, a droplet of water falling from its edge to strike the counter with a sound like a gong in the absolute quiet. Thomas began, then stopped. He looked at Lyra, really looked at her, and saw his daughter in the loneliness that lived behind her eyes. "Yes, I do." Zolthar's laughter broke the silence like a hammer through crystal. It started low, a rumble in his chest, then built into something cruel and sharp. His 6 arms spread wide as if embracing the absurdity of the moment. "Pop-Tarts," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Processed earth garbage. Synthetic pastry filled with chemical approximations of fruit. This is what the child asks for in the Intergalactic Culinary Institute." Chef Raxus joined the laughter, his too many teeth glinting. Others followed, nervous at first, then emboldened. The sound rolled through the hall like a wave, washing over Thomas, who stood very still and said nothing. He had learned long ago that defending himself only made the laughter louder. But Valora did not laugh. She moved forward, her robes whispering across marble, and the laughter died as quickly as it had begun. She stopped beside her daughter, one hand resting on Lyra's shoulder with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so powerful. "My daughter has asked a question," Valora said, her voice carrying the weight of collapsed stars. "I would hear it answered." Thomas set down his cloth. He folded it once, precisely, the way he did everything. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. The voice of someone who had told bedtime stories in the dark and made promises he intended to keep. "A Pop-Tart is a simple thing," he said. "Pastry with filling. You toast it until the edges caramelize, until the filling gets warm enough to burn your tongue if you are not careful. It tastes like breakfast before school. Like someone caring enough to make sure you eat something before you start your day." Lyra's eyes brightened. She nodded once, a small motion that somehow contained an entire conversation. Zolthar stepped forward, his 6 arms folding across his chest. His obsidian face held an expression Thomas recognized from every kitchen he had ever worked. The look of someone who had found an opportunity to crush something small and defenseless. "Then perhaps," Zolthar said slowly, savoring each word, "the human would like to demonstrate his expertise. A challenge witnessed by the critic supreme herself. Let us see if processed earth garbage can satisfy Kryn palates." The trap closed, and Thomas walked into it anyway. Zolthar's smile spread across his face like oil across water, dark and gleaming with malice. He gestured to the grand hall, to the assembled witnesses, to the tasting table still laden with rejected masterpieces. His 6 arms moved in elaborate patterns as he spoke, conducting an invisible orchestra. "Humiliation. The terms are simple," Zolthar announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "The human will prepare his Pop-Tart. If the child eats it, if she finishes what he makes, then he may keep his position here. But when he fails, and he will fail, he will be expelled from the institute. Banned from culinary work across all recognized systems, his name will be struck from every registry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some chefs looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Others leaned forward, eager for the spectacle. Ambassador Thiss's crystalline form refracted light in sharp angles, her discomfort visible in the jagged patterns she cast across the floor. Thomas looked at Lyra. She had not moved from his prep station, her small hands resting on the counter's edge, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall frozen in moonlight. She watched him with eyes that held something he recognized. The same look Emma got when she was lonely, when she needed someone to see her as more than just a problem to solve or a mouth to feed. "I accept," Thomas said quietly. The hall exploded into conversation. Zolthar's smile widened. Valora remained motionless, her dark eyes fixed on Thomas with an intensity that felt like being examined under surgical light. She did not intervene. She did not object to the terms. She simply watched, waiting to see what would happen when someone chose kindness over self-preservation. "One condition," Thomas added, and the hall fell silent again. He met Zolthar's gaze without flinching. "I need 1 Earth day to prepare. 24 hours. Zolthar laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "You need a full day to toast pastry. By all means, human. Take your time. Perfect your garbage." He turned to the assembled chefs, arms spread wide. "Let it be witnessed. Tomorrow, at first light, we gather again. The human will present his creation, and the child will judge." Thomas nodded once. He began gathering his tools, moving with the same steady precision he always used. His old earth knife, his cutting board, scarred from years of use. A small ceramic bowl Emma had made in school, painted with uneven stars. He had brought it from Earth, carried it across light years because it reminded him why he was here. Lyra touched his hand, her fingers cool and delicate. She did not speak, but her eyes held a question. "Can you really do this? Or perhaps, will you try even though you might fail?" Thomas thought of Emma, alone on Earth, waiting for his calls. He thought of every breakfast he had made, every meal prepared with love instead of art. He looked at Lyra and saw every child who had ever been too small to matter in a world built for giants. "Yes," he said simply, "I will try." The kitchen emptied as night settled over Sector 7, like a blanket woven from darkness and distant stars. The other chefs departed in clusters, their voices carrying mockery and pity in equal measure. Thomas remained at his prep station, alone in the vast space that felt larger in silence than it ever had in chaos. He stood for a long moment, hands flat against the counter, feeling the cool metal beneath his palms. 24 hours. One day to remember everything that mattered. The Institute's pantry stretched 3 levels deep, filled with ingredients harvested from worlds Thomas would never see. He walked past shelves of crystallized emotions and bottled starlight, past refrigeration units holding proteins that pulsed with their own bioluminescence. He found what he needed in the forgotten back corner, where the Earth imports gathered dust behind exotic specimens. Flour, sugar, butter that had traveled across galaxies in stasis. Thomas carried his findings to a small preparation area near the loading dock, a space the other chefs never used because it lacked the dramatic lighting and holographic displays that made cooking feel like performance art. Here, the overhead bulbs buzzed faintly. The counters were simple steel. It reminded him of the apartment kitchen on Earth, where he had made breakfast for Emma every morning before school. He began with the pastry. His hands moved through the motions without thought, muscle memory older than his time at the Institute. Flour and butter worked together until they formed something that held its shape but remained tender. He had learned this from his grandmother, who had learned it from hers. A chain of knowledge passed through generations who understood that food was memory made edible. The filling required more thought. He had been saving strawberries from his prep work, perfect ones that Zolthar's dishes did not require. He had hidden them in his small refrigeration unit, a habit born from having a daughter who loved strawberries more than anything else in the universe. Thomas crushed them slowly, adding just enough sugar to brighten their flavor without drowning it. The scent filled the small space, sweet and honest. Hours passed. Thomas worked through the night, not rushing, not performing. He thought about Emma as he rolled the pastry thin. He thought about the morning ritual they had shared before he left Earth. How she would sit at their small table, still half asleep, while he toasted Pop-Tarts and told her stories about the stars. How she would eat slowly, carefully, making each bite last because it meant a few more minutes before he had to leave for work. He thought about Lyra, sitting at that grand table, surrounded by complexity she did not want. He thought about children everywhere, in every system, who sometimes just needed something simple and warm made by someone who cared if they ate it. The pastries took shape. Simple rectangles, nothing fancy, nothing meant to impress. He filled them with the strawberry mixture, sealed the edges with fork tines the way his grandmother had taught him. They looked humble. They looked like home. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly toward dawn. Morning arrived with light the color of copper spilled across silk. The grand hall filled slowly, aliens of every species taking their positions with the solemnity of witnesses to an execution. Thomas stood at his prep station, his simple pastries arranged on a plain white plate. No garnish, no architectural presentation, just 6 rectangles, golden brown at the edges, still warm from the oven. Zolthar entered like a conquering general, his 6 arms carrying a massive sculptural dish that defied gravity and good sense. It rose 3 feet high, a tower of edible artistry that incorporated 47 separate techniques and ingredients from 9 different worlds. Smoke curled from its base. Light pulsed within its crystalline layers. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. It was everything the Institute worshipped. "Behold," Zolthar announced, his voice filling every corner of the hall. "Deconstructed childhood, edible nostalgia. Each element represents a primal memory, reconstructed through molecular gastronomy to speak directly to the crin neural pathways." 3 days of preparation, the pinnacle of culinary evolution. The crowd murmured in appreciation. Even those who disliked Zolthar had to admire the technical mastery on display. Ambassador Thiss's crystalline form sparkled with reflected light from the dish, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floor. Valora entered last, Lyra at her side. The child looked tired, her luminescent skin dimmer than yesterday. She walked to the tasting table and sat in the same chair, her small frame dwarfed by the grandeur surrounding her. Valora stood behind her daughter, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Zolthar presented his masterpiece first. He placed it before Lyra with reverence, each of his 6 arms finding perfect position. He described each component in loving detail, the science and artistry woven together, the way each flavor would unfold across her palate in carefully orchestrated sequence. The dish hummed faintly, alive with molecular precision. Lyra stared at it. Her expression did not change. She did not reach for the utensils, did not lean forward to inhale its complex aromatics. After 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, she simply shook her head. Once, final. Zolthar's confidence shattered. His arms dropped to his sides. His obsidian skin seemed to lose its luster in real time, becoming dull and lifeless. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the sound of fabric against skin filling the silence. Thomas stepped forward. He carried the white plate himself. No ceremony, no presentation. He set it before Lyra and stepped back. The pastries looked absurd next to Zolthar's rejected masterpiece. Simple, small, almost embarrassingly plain. He had wrapped one in a paper napkin, the way a father would. The way he used to for Emma, so she could hold it without burning her fingers. Lyra looked at it, then at Thomas, then back at the pastry. She picked it up. The napkin crinkled softly. She brought it to her lips and took a bite. The hall held its breath. She chewed slowly, her eyes widening slightly. Then she took another bite, and another. She ate the entire thing. The silence that followed was not empty. It pressed against the walls like a living thing, heavy with implications no one yet understood. Lyra reached for a second pastry, her movements unhurried, and the simple act felt like watching a planet shift its orbit. She ate this one more slowly, savoring it, her eyes closing briefly as if listening to music only she could hear. Valora moved. The sound of her robes across marble was the only noise in the entire hall. She walked around the tasting table, past Zolthar's rejected masterpiece, past the gathered chefs who shrank back as she passed. She stopped at Thomas's prep station, her towering form making him seem even smaller than usual. Her dark eyes swept across his workspace. The old knife with its worn handle, the scarred cutting, board. The ceramic bowl painted with uneven stars, clearly made by a child's hands. She touched the bowl with one long finger, traced the crooked constellation Emma had drawn in paint that had faded from washing. "Who do you cook for?" Valora asked. Her voice was quiet, meant only for him, but in the absolute silence it carried to every corner of the hall. Thomas did not hesitate. "My daughter. Every dish I prep here, every ingredient I handle, I imagine I am making it for her. I imagine her sitting at our table, waiting. I imagine making something that tells her she matters more than anything else in the universe." Valora's expression did not change, but something in her posture softened. She straightened, turned to face the assembled crowd, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority built over centuries. "I have spent 3 years searching," Valora said. 12 systems, 400 culinary schools, thousands of chefs, each more celebrated than the last. I have tasted dishes that could make stars weep. I have witnessed techniques that bend the laws of physics, and I have watched my daughter starve. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Zolthar's 6 arms twitched, uncertain whether to rise in defense or fall in surrender. "Not from lack of food," Valora continued, "but from an abundance of everything except what she needed. You have built temples to complexity. You have made gods of technique. You have forgotten the first and most important thing about feeding another living being." She turned back to Thomas, and for the first time since entering the institute, she bowed. Not deeply, but enough. Enough to make every chef in the hall understand that something fundamental had shifted. You remember that food is love before it is art, Valora said. You remember that nourishment begins with caring whether the person before you actually eats what you make. This simple pastry, made with attention and memory and the kind of love that crosses galaxies, is worth more than every truffle in the universe. Lyra finished her second pastry and reached for a third. Somewhere in the crowd, a young apprentice began to cry. Valora gestured to her daughter, and Lyra stood, still holding a half-eaten pastry wrapped in its paper napkin. The child moved to her mother's side, and together they faced the assembled chefs like judges, delivering a verdict that had been decades in the making. Children are dying, Valora said, and the words landed like stones dropped into still water. Not quickly, not from poison or disease. They are fading because they will not eat. Because our cuisine has become so elevated, so abstract, so divorced from the simple act of nourishment that children across our empire refuse to touch it. She paused, letting the truth settle into every corner of the hall. Ambassador Thiss's crystalline form had stopped refracting light, gone dull with shock. Chef Raxus's too many teeth were hidden behind lips, pressed tight with dawning horror. We have pediatric wards filled with younglings on feeding tubes, Valora continued. We have therapists and nutritionists and specialists of every kind trying to solve the mystery. But it is not a mystery. It is a consequence. We have made food into something that requires a degree to understand. We have turned eating into an intellectual exercise, and children, bless them, refuse to participate in our elaborate delusion. Zolthar found his voice, though it came out smaller than before, stripped of its earlier arrogance. But the techniques, the innovation, the advancement of culinary science, for whom? Valora cut him off, her voice sharp as a blade drawn in darkness. For critics like myself, for chefs whose egos require constant feeding. What good is your advancement if it leaves the vulnerable to starve? What is the point of your innovation if it cannot answer a child's hunger? She moved closer to Zolthar, and he stepped back despite himself, his 6 arms drawing in protectively. I have watched you for 2 years, Valora said. Every dish you create is a monument to your own cleverness. Every plate is a performance where you are the star and the diner is merely an audience forced to applaud. You have built an empire on making people feel inadequate if they do not understand your genius. And in doing so, you have failed at the most fundamental task any cook must achieve. You have forgotten how to feed. The hall erupted in whispers. Some chefs looked outraged, others thoughtful, still others ashamed. Zolthar's obsidian skin had gone completely dull, his 6 arms hanging limp at his sides like flags on a windless day. Thomas remained at his prep station, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. He began cleaning his workspace, an automatic gesture, wiping down the counter with the same steady precision he always used. But Valora noticed. And him, she said, pointing to Thomas. A prep cook. The invisible human everyone dismisses. He achieved in one night what your entire faculty could not accomplish in 3 years. He remembered what all of you have forgotten. Valora drew herself up to her full height, her presence filling the hall like a tide that could not be turned back. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of decree, of decisions already made and resources already allocated. Thomas Reed, she said, and hearing his full name spoken aloud in this place felt strange to him, as if someone had finally noticed he had a name at all. I offer you a position, not as prep cook, not as assistant, as director of fundamental nutrition for the Intergalactic Culinary Institute. The hall exploded. Shouts of protest, gasps of disbelief, a few scattered sounds that might have been approval but were drowned in the chaos. Zolthar's 6 arms shot upward as if struck by lightning, his voice rising above the din. This is madness. He has no credentials, no training in advanced technique, no understanding of, he has what you lack. Valora interrupted, her voice cutting through Zolthar's protests like a hot knife through butter. He has the ability to make someone want to eat. Your credentials are meaningless if the food you create is refused. Your technique is worthless if it produces nothing but waste and hunger. She turned back to Thomas, who stood frozen at his prep station, his cleaning cloth still in hand. Your task will be this, Valora continued. Teach these chefs what they have forgotten. Rebuild this institute's curriculum from its foundation. Show them that a perfectly toasted pastry, made with attention and love, matters more than all the molecular gastronomy in 12 systems. Can you do this? Thomas thought of Emma. He thought of the years he had spent invisible, dismissed, mocked for his simple approach. He thought of every child who had ever sat at a table, hungry not just for food but for the feeling of being cared for. He looked at Lyra, who watched him with hope bright in her luminescent eyes. Yes, Thomas said, but I will need help. I will need to bring my daughter here, and I will need assistants who actually want to learn. Done, Valora said without hesitation. Lyra will be your first teaching assistant. She knows better than anyone what children need. Your daughter will have quarters in the faculty housing and enrollment in our educational programs. She turned to face Zolthar, and her expression hardened into something that could have carved stone. Chef Zolthar, you are hereby stripped of your title as head chef. You will serve as apprentice under Director Reed until such time as you can demonstrate that you remember how to feed rather than perform. This is not punishment. This is education. Refuse, and you will be expelled from the institute permanently. Zolthar's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His obsidian skin had lost all its shine, reduced to the matte finish of common stone. Finally, his arms dropped, his spine bent, and he nodded once. Defeated, or perhaps, for the first time in decades, humbled. The transformation did not happen overnight, though later, when people told the story, they would compress time into something neater than truth. Change arrived slowly, like dawn spreading across a planet too large to illuminate all at once. But it came. Thomas established the School of Simple Comfort in the Institute's eastern wing, where light fell through windows that had previously been shuttered because no one thought to look outside while cooking. The first class had 12 students, all volunteers, all curious about the human who had made a child eat. Lyra sat in the front row, her silver hair catching morning light, taking notes in careful script. Emma arrived 3 weeks later, stepping off a transport with her small suitcase and the same crooked smile Thomas had crossed galaxies to afford. She hugged him for so long that other passengers had to walk around them. That night, he made her breakfast for dinner, simple toasted pastries with strawberry filling, and they ate together at a small table in their new quarters while she told him about Earth and school and everything he had missed. The curriculum rebuilt itself from scratch. Thomas taught master chefs how to toast bread properly, how to time an egg so the yolk ran gold, how to make someone feel loved through the simple act of feeding them. Some students resisted, clinging to their complexity like drowning people clutching stones. Others wept when they tasted their first meal made with care instead of cleverness. Zolthar attended every class, his 6 arms folded, his obsidian skin slowly regaining its luster as humility polished away arrogance. He learned to dice onions with Thomas's old earth knife. He learned that precision meant nothing without purpose. On the 43rd day, he made a simple soup, and when a young Vayari student finished the entire bowl and asked for more, Zolthar cried for the first time in his long life. The School of Simple Comfort expanded across 12 systems within 2 years. Kryn children began eating again. Pediatric wards emptied. Parents wrote letters of gratitude that filled entire storage units. The Institute's reputation shifted from a temple of haute cuisine to something more fundamental, a place where people learn to nourish rather than impress. On quiet mornings, before classes began, Thomas would walk through the kitchens with Emma and Lyra, teaching them both how to feel when bread was ready, how to listen to vegetables as they cooked, how to know when something was done not by timer but by attention. The girls became sisters in everything but biology, laughing together over burnt toast and arguing cheerfully about the best way to fold dough. Valora visited often, watching from doorways, her dark eyes soft with something that might have been gratitude or relief or simply the peace of knowing her daughter, and would grow up in a galaxy that remembered how to feed its children. She never announced her presence, never interrupted. She simply watched Thomas teach, his worn knife moving with the same steady precision, his voice gentle as he reminded students that every meal was a promise kept or broken.